The massive dome of Harmony Prime stretched above the assembled delegates, like a crystal sky filled with swirling nebulae. Ambassador Lisa Carter smoothed her blue diplomatic uniform and stepped up to the central speaking platform. Around her, representatives from 47 different worlds sat in their species-specific seats, breathing apparatus and environmental suits creating a rainbow of alien forms. "Honored council members," Lisa began, her voice carrying clearly through the translation devices. "I stand before you today to present humanity's progress report for our third year as members of this distinguished body." Chairman Zethkar floated in his containment field at the center of the chamber, his ethereal form shifting like liquid starlight. The ancient being had guided the Galactic Council for over 2 centuries, and his approval meant everything to newer species like humanity. 3 years ago, you took a chance on a young species that had barely learned to travel between stars, Lisa continued. You saw past our violent history and welcomed us into your peaceful alliance. Today, I am proud to show you how far we have come. The holographic display behind her lit up with images of human colonies. Children played in parks alongside young aliens with scales, tentacles, and crystalline skin. Human doctors worked side by side with Valderi healers, their 4 arms moving in perfect harmony as they tended to patients. Engineers from Earth collaborated, with the insectoid Nexans on projects that would have been impossible for either species alone. Our medical research division has developed 17 new treatments using traditional Earth plants combined with Valderi biotechnology, Lisa announced. These medicines have already saved thousands of lives across 12 different species. Approving sounds filled the chamber. The Valderi delegate, her pale blue skin glowing with pleasure, gestured with all 4 arms in their traditional sign of gratitude. Even the stern Krogar representative, War Master Throck, seemed mildly impressed by the statistics. Commander Jake Morrison sat in the Human Observer section, watching the presentation with growing unease. His dress uniform felt tight around his shoulders, a reminder of the military career he had abandoned to become a diplomat. Around him, other human representatives smiled and nodded at each positive reaction from the alien delegates. Our agricultural programs have increased food production on 7 colony worlds by an average of 43%, Lisa announced. We have also established cultural exchange programs with 26 species, sharing our art, music, and literature while learning from your rich traditions. The chairman's form brightened with approval. Ambassador Carter, these achievements are remarkable. When humanity first requested membership in our council, many questioned whether a species with such a violent past could truly embrace our peaceful ways. Jake's jaw tightened. He remembered those early debates, when species after species had cited human history as evidence that Earth's people were too dangerous for galactic society. Wars, genocides, and conflicts stretching back thousands of years had painted humanity as savage barbarians barely worthy of contact, let alone membership. Your transformation has been inspiring, continued Chairman Zethkar. In just 3 short years, you have proven that any species can evolve beyond its primitive origins and join our enlightened community. War Master Throck rose from his seat, his massive frame towering over the other delegates. The Krogar were one of the few militaristic species in the council, and they had been humanity's harshest critics during the admission process. With respect, Chairman, Throck rumbled, his voice like grinding stone, humanity's military history cannot be simply ignored. These people conquered their own world through violence and bloodshed. They built weapons capable of destroying entire planets before they even left their solar system. Jake felt his hands clench into fists before he forced them to relax. Dr. Amy Walsh, sitting 2 seats away, showed no such restraint. Her knuckles were white as she gripped her datapad. That is exactly why their transformation is so remarkable, interjected Counselor Yith, the Nexan representative. Her insectoid features clicked with enthusiasm. To see a species abandon their warlike nature so completely demonstrates the power of our peaceful influence. Lisa nodded gracefully. War Master Throck raises valid concerns about our past. We do not deny the violence in human history, but we have learned from those mistakes. We have chosen a better path. Chosen, Jake muttered under his breath. Captain Ben Hughes, sitting next to him, shot him a warning look. Our new colonies are models of peaceful cooperation, Lisa continued. We have established minimal defensive systems, just enough to handle natural disasters and wildlife management. Our people live in harmony with their alien neighbors, sharing resources and knowledge freely. The council members murmured their approval. This was exactly what they wanted to hear. Humanity had been successfully domesticated, turned from wolves into sheep through the gentle guidance of superior civilizations. I must ask, said the Valderi delegate, her musical voice filled with curiosity, what became of your military forces? Surely a species with such extensive combat experience maintained some defensive capabilities. Jake leaned forward, interested in how Lisa would answer this question. It was one that had been raised repeatedly during the admission process. Our space forces have been restructured into exploration and emergency response units, Lisa explained. Former military personnel like Commander Morrison have been retrained as diplomats and colony administrators. We believe that preparation for war only invites conflict. Wise words, Chairman Zethkar agreed. This is why we are prepared to approve your request for expansion to 3 additional systems. The Kepler 442, Ross 128, and Proxima Centauri B regions all show excellent potential for peaceful human settlement. Jake stood up abruptly, drawing surprised looks from around the chamber. Chairman, if I may address the council. Of course. Commander Morrison, please, share your thoughts. Jake walked to the speaker's platform, feeling the weight of dozens of alien gazes upon him. Honored delegates, while I appreciate your confidence in humanity's peaceful intentions, I believe we should discuss defensive preparations for these new colonies. A ripple of unease passed through the chamber. War Master Throck's eyes narrowed with interest. Commander, Lisa said carefully, I believe we have already covered our defensive policies. With respect, Ambassador, wildlife management systems are not defensive preparations, Jake replied. These colonies will be on the outer rim of known space. If anything threatens them, help could be days or weeks away. Commander Morrison, Chairman Zethkar's voice carried a note of disappointment. Surely you are not suggesting that humanity reverts to its old militaristic ways? Such thinking is precisely what we hoped you had evolved beyond. I am suggesting that being prepared and being aggressive are 2 different things, Jake said firmly. A species can choose peace while still maintaining the ability to defend itself. Unnecessary, declared Councillor Yeath. The galaxy has been at peace for over 50 years. What possible threat could these colonies face that would require military preparation? Jake looked around the chamber, seeing the same expression on every alien face. They viewed his concerns as evidence of humanity's incomplete evolution, proof that the violent instincts still lurked beneath the surface. I understand your concerns, Commander, Chairman Zethkar said gently. But this kind of thinking belongs to humanity's past, not its future. Trust in the peace we have built together. Jake wanted to argue further, to point out that 50 years was a blink of an eye in galactic terms, that peace was often just the space between conflicts. But he could see it would be useless. These beings had lived in peace for so long they had forgotten what threats looked like. Of course, Chairman, Jake said finally, I defer to the Council's wisdom. As he returned to his seat, Jake caught Dr. Walsh's eye. She gave him a slight nod, the kind of acknowledgement that passed between people who understood each other. Captain Hughes touched his shoulder briefly, a gesture of support. The session continued with discussions of trade agreements and cultural programs. But Jake's mind wandered to reports he had been reading. Long-range sensor data that suggested something was moving in the dark spaces between galaxies. Probably nothing, the scientists said. Natural phenomena, most likely, but Jake had spent too many years in uniform to ignore his instincts. Something was coming, and when it arrived, he suspected the galaxy's 50 years of peace would end very quickly. The only question was whether humanity would remember who they really were when that moment came, or if 3 years of playing the role of peaceful citizens had made them forget the wolves that still lived in their blood. The morning sun cast long shadows across the fields of Haven's Rest as Colony Administrator Paul Martin walked through the settlement's central plaza. Children from 6 different species played together on the climbing structures, their laughter mixing with the alien songs of native birds. A group of human and Valderi farmers discussed crop rotation near the fountain, while Nexan engineers worked alongside human technicians to install a new water purification system. Paul smiled as he watched the scene. This was everything the Galactic Council had hoped for when they approved human expansion. Haven's Rest represented the perfect example of peaceful coexistence, a place where former enemies could become friends and where different cultures could blend into something beautiful. Administrator Martin called Dr. Ryan Clark as he approached from the research station. The xenobiologist carried a tablet displaying colorful charts and graphs. I wanted to show you our latest findings about the symbiotic relationships in the local ecosystem. Good news, I hope, Paul replied, accepting the tablet and scrolling through the data. Better than good. The native plant life here has developed some amazing partnerships with the soil microorganisms. If we can understand how they work together, we might be able to improve crop yields across the entire sector. Paul nodded approvingly. This kind of research was exactly what humanity needed to prove their value to the galactic community. Scientific advancement through peaceful cooperation, not military conquest. Dr. Clark, Administrator Martin, a voice called from behind them. Security Chief Kate Sullivan jogged over, her uniform crisp despite the early hour. Sorry to interrupt, but we need to discuss the monthly safety drill. Paul suppressed a small sigh. Kate was a good security chief, but her military background sometimes made her overly cautious about threats that simply did not exist on Haven's Rest. Kate, we discussed this last month. The colonists are busy with the harvest season. Maybe we could postpone the drill until next month. Sir, with respect, that's exactly what we said last month, Kate replied. These people need to know what to do in an emergency. We're 3 days' travel from the nearest help. What kind of emergency? Dr. Clark asked. The most dangerous thing on this planet is a tree bear, and they're more afraid of us than we are of them. Kate looked frustrated. It's not about the local wildlife. We're on the outer rim of known space. If something happens, if there's any kind of threat, these people need to be prepared. Paul patted her shoulder gently. Kate, I understand your concerns, but look around. What possible threat could reach us here? The galaxy has been at peace for 50 years. The Council monitors all space traffic. We're safer here than we would be on Earth. Lieutenant Sam Parker approached the group, his young face eager and serious. Chief Sullivan, the perimeter sensors are showing some unusual readings again. Kate turned to him immediately. What kind of readings? Deep space signals, very faint. Could be equipment malfunction, but they're similar to what we detected last. Weak. Have you sent the data to the Council monitoring station? Paul asked. Yes, sir, but they said it was probably just background radiation from a distant pulsar. Kate frowned. What do you think, Parker? The young lieutenant hesitated. Honestly, Chief, the signals are too regular for natural phenomena. They almost look like engine signatures, but they're massive, bigger than anything in our databases. Paul felt a flicker of concern, but pushed it aside. The Galactic Council had monitoring stations throughout this sector. If there was any real threat, they would have detected it long before a small colony like Haven's Rest. Keep monitoring the signals, Paul decided, but don't alarm the colonists unnecessarily. The council experts know what they're doing. Kate looked like she wanted to argue, but nodded reluctantly. Yes, sir. Come on, Parker. Let's check the sensor array. As they walked away, Dr. Clark shook his head. Military types. They see threats everywhere. Kate's just doing her job, Paul replied diplomatically. But privately, he agreed. Humans like Kate Sullivan had trouble adapting to the peaceful reality of galactic civilization. They were stuck in old patterns of thinking, always expecting the next war. 2 weeks later, Paul was reviewing agricultural reports when his communication device buzzed with an urgent message from the council monitoring station. The message was brief. Unusual deep space activity detected. Investigating. Maintain normal operations. Paul forwarded the message to Kate, knowing she would want to see it. Within minutes, she was at his office door. Sir, we need to talk about evacuation procedures. Kate, the message clearly says to maintain normal operations. The message also says they're investigating unusual activity. That means they don't know what it is. Paul leaned back in his chair. The council has been monitoring space for centuries. They have technology we can barely understand. If they're not worried, why should we be? Because we're the ones who'll die if they're wrong. The blunt statement hung in the air between them. Paul had always known that Kate's military background made her think differently about safety. But this was the first time she had spoken so directly about the possibility of real danger. What are you suggesting? Paul asked carefully. I want to run a full evacuation drill. Not just the basic safety procedures, but a real emergency evacuation. I want to know how quickly we can get people to the ships if we need to leave. Kate, that would cause panic. People moved here to build lives, not to practice running away. Better panicked and alive than calm and dead. Paul studied her face. Kate Sullivan had served in 3 different military units before becoming a colony. Security chief. She had seen combat, unlike most of the peaceful colonists under his care. All right, he said finally, but present it as a standard emergency preparedness exercise. Don't mention the deep space signals. Kate nodded gratefully. Thank you, sir. I'll schedule it for next week. The evacuation drill was a disaster. Colonists moved slowly, treating it as an inconvenience rather than a genuine emergency. Families stopped to pack personal belongings. The Nexan engineers insisted on shutting down their equipment properly. Several Valdari got lost trying to find the correct evacuation routes. What should have taken 2 hours stretched to nearly 6. Kate watched the chaos with growing horror, imagining what would happen if this was a real emergency. It's just a drill, Paul reminded her as they watched the last group of stragglers board the evacuation ships. In a real emergency, people would move faster. No, sir, they wouldn't, Kate replied grimly. In a real emergency, they'd move slower. Fear makes people stupid. That night, Kate stood alone in the security office, staring at the deep space monitoring displays. The signals were getting stronger, more frequent. Lieutenant Parker had identified at least 6 distinct sources, all moving in the same general direction, toward inhabited space. She had tried to get more information from the Council monitoring station, but their responses had become increasingly vague. Natural phenomena under investigation. No immediate threat detected. Maintain standard protocols. Kate had spent enough time in the military to recognize bureaucratic language designed to avoid panic. The Council didn't know what was coming, but they knew something was coming. She pulled up the colony's defensive systems on her screen. 2. Security shuttles with basic patrol weapons. A perimeter fence designed to keep out wildlife. Communication arrays that could call for help if help was close enough to matter. It wasn't enough. Not nearly enough. Kate opened a secure communication channel to Earth. She needed to talk to people who would understand her concerns, people who remembered what it meant to be ready for a fight. But as she began typing her message, she paused. What could she say? That she had a bad feeling? That her instincts were telling her something was wrong? The Council had already dismissed the sensor readings as natural phenomena. She thought about Commander Morrison's speech at the Council session. his warnings about defensive preparations. The other delegates had looked at him like he was reverting to humanity's primitive past. Maybe he was right. Maybe they all were. Kate deleted her message and closed the communication channel. If something was coming, Haven's Rest would face it with whatever they had. She just hoped it would be enough. Outside her office window, the colonists of Haven's Rest slept peacefully under alien stars, trusting in the Galactic Council's promise of safety. None of them noticed the new signals appearing on the deep space monitors, or the way those signals were growing stronger with each passing hour. Captain Danny Wright was halfway through his morning coffee when his ship's proximity alarms began screaming. The merchant vessel Lucky Strike had been hauling medical supplies to the Outer Rim colonies for 3 years, and Danny had never heard. The alarms sound like this. The pitch was wrong, too high and too urgent. "Computer, what's the alert?" he called out, setting down his mug and rushing to the bridge. "Multiple large objects detected at extreme sensor range," the ship's artificial intelligence responded. "Size estimates exceed known vessel classifications." Danny dropped into his pilot seat and pulled up the sensor display. What he saw made his blood run cold. 6 massive contacts were moving through space at impossible speeds, each one larger than the biggest space stations he had ever seen. "Computer, run full-spectrum analysis. Try to identify vessel types." Analysis complete. No matches found in galactic databases. Composition appears to be biomechanical. Estimated length of lead vessel, 47 kilometers. Danny stared at the numbers on his screen. 47 kilometers. The largest ship in the Galactic Council fleet was barely 3 kilometers long. "Open emergency communication channel to Galactic Council Monitoring Station Alpha 7, Danny ordered, his voice shaking slightly. "Channel open. Alpha 7. This is merchant vessel Lucky Strike. I have 6 unknown contacts on my sensors. Massive size, heading toward inhabited systems. Request immediate assistance." Static filled the communication channel for several long seconds before a bored voice responded. "Lucky Strike, this is Alpha 7. We show no contacts in your sector. Please check your sensor calibration." "Alpha 7, my sensors are working. Fine. These things are huge. Each one is bigger than a space station." "Lucky Strike, we are tracking several natural phenomena in the Outer Rim. You are probably detecting asteroid formations or gas clouds. Adjust your sensors and continue your mission." Danny looked at his display again. The contacts were definitely moving under their own power, maintaining perfect formation and accelerating toward the inner systems. "Alpha 7, these are not asteroids. They're ships, and they're heading directly toward populated space. Lucky Strike, discontinue unnecessary transmissions. Alpha 7 out." The communication channel went dead. Danny sat alone on his bridge, watching the massive contacts grow closer on his sensors. He thought about the colonies in their path, the millions of beings who had no idea what was coming toward them. "Computer, send a general emergency broadcast. On all frequencies. Include full sensor data. Broadcasting now." Danny gripped his chair as the largest contact suddenly changed course, turning directly toward his position. His ship's computer began calculating intercept times, and the results made him sick. "Computer, emergency jump to hyperspace. Plot course. For nearest inhabited system. Unable to comply. Unknown energy field is interfering with hyperspace engines." Danny's hands flew over his controls, trying every trick he had learned in 20 years of merchant shipping. Nothing worked. Whatever those ships were, they had technology that could trap other vessels in normal space. The lead contact was close enough now that Danny could see it on visual display. What he saw would haunt him for the rest of his very short life. The ship looked like it had been grown rather than built. Its surface writhed with organic textures that pulsed with sickly light. Massive tentacle-like appendages extended from its sides, reaching out toward Lucky Strike like the arms of some cosmic predator. "Emergency log entry," Danny said, his voice steady despite his terror. "This is Captain Danny Wright of the Merchant, vessel Lucky Strike. I am being approached by unknown hostile vessels of enormous size. They appear to be biomechanical in nature and have technology that prevents hyperspace escape. If anyone receives this message, warn the colonies. These things are heading for inhabited space, and they don't look friendly. The tentacles reached Lucky Strike and began to wrap around the hull. Danny felt his ship shudder as the alien appendages tightened their grip. They're not trying to destroy us, he realized aloud. They're trying to capture us. The transmission cut off as Lucky Strike disappeared into the belly of the massive alien vessel. 3 hours later, the emergency session of the Galactic Council was in chaos. Representatives from dozens of species argued loudly while Chairman Zethkar tried to maintain order. The transmission could be a hoax, insisted Councillor Yeath. No vessel that large could exist without our knowledge. The sensor data appears genuine, replied the Valderi delegate. But perhaps Captain Wright encountered some unknown natural phenomenon. War Master Throck stood up, his massive frame commanding immediate attention. I have reviewed the transmission. Those were warships, and they were hunting. Impossible, Chairman Zethkar said firmly. The galaxy has been at peace for 50 years. No species has the technology to build vessels of that size. Commander Morrison entered the chamber just as the debate reached its peak. He had been reviewing the deep space monitoring data that the Council had dismissed as natural phenomena for weeks. Chairman, with your permission, I would like to address the Council. Of course, Commander Morrison. Perhaps you can provide some insight into this situation. Morrison walked to the central platform, his face grim. Honored delegates, we are under attack by an unknown force from outside our galaxy. The evidence has been building for weeks, but we have chosen to ignore it. Angry voices erupted from the assembled delegates. Morrison raised his hand for silence. The signals our monitoring stations detected were not natural phenomena. They were the energy signatures of a massive fleet traveling through hyperspace. Captain Wright's transmission confirms what we should have realized weeks ago. Commander, Chairman Zethkar said carefully, you are suggesting that an extragalactic invasion is underway. Surely you understand how unlikely that sounds. Unlikely or not, it's happening, Morrison replied. We need to mobilize every available ship and prepare our defenses immediately. Commander Morrison? Councillor Yeath clicked her mandibles in distress. Such military thinking is exactly what we hoped humanity had moved beyond. Violence is not the answer to every problem. Then what do you suggest? Morrison asked bluntly. Diplomatic negotiations with beings who capture ships and eat them whole? Before anyone could answer, new alarms began sounding throughout the station. Emergency broadcasts flooded the communication channels as colony after colony reported the same nightmare scenario. 3 colonies in the Vega sector have gone dark, reported a technician. No response to communications. Epsilon Eridani colony reports massive unknown ships in orbit, called another. Transmission cut off mid-sentence. Kepler 442. Colony is under attack. They're requesting immediate military assistance. Chairman Zethkar's ethereal form flickered with distress as the reports continued to pour in. Within minutes, it became clear that the unknown fleet was systematically attacking every inhabited world in its path. What do they want? Whispered the Valderi delegate. The answer came from an unexpected source. A new transmission appeared on the main screen. Its origin point the Epsilon Eridani system. The image showed a being unlike anything in the galactic database. It stood 3 meters tall. Its body a horrifying fusion of organic tissue and mechanical components. Its face was a mass of writhing tentacles surrounding a single massive eye. Inhabitants of this galaxy, the creature spoke, its voice a mechanical rasp that somehow conveyed absolute authority. I am the Harvester Prime. We have traveled from our dying galaxy to claim new resources and worlds. Your planets will be stripped of all useful materials. Your populations will be processed into biomass to fuel our ships. Resistance is pointless. You have one rotation of your primary star to surrender unconditionally. The transmission ended, leaving the council chamber in stunned silence. They want everything, Morrison said quietly. Our worlds, our resources, our lives, they're not here to conquer us. They're here to consume us. War Master Throck was the first to speak. How many ships do we have that could fight these creatures? The Council maintains a peacekeeping force of 200 vessels, reported a technician. Most are lightly armed exploration ships. Against a fleet that can build 47-kilometer warships, Morrison said grimly. We need to contact every species immediately and mobilize everything that can fight. Commander, Chairman Zethkar said desperately, surely there must be some diplomatic solution. Morrison looked around the chamber at the terrified faces of beings who had lived their entire lives in peace. They still couldn't accept what was happening, still believed that words could solve problems that required force. But somewhere in human space, Morrison knew that other minds were already working on the problem. Minds that understood what the harvesters really were and what would be required to stop them. The galaxy's 50 years of peace were over. The only question now was whether anyone would be left alive to remember what peace had been like. The first sign that something had changed in humanity came from a mining station in the Alpha Centauri system. Engineer Carla Davis had been working the asteroid belt for 5 years, running peaceful extraction operations that supplied raw materials to 3 different species. She was known throughout the sector as a quiet, methodical woman who solved problems with careful planning and precise calculations. When news of the harvester attacks reached her station, something shifted inside Carla's mind like a switch being thrown. She stood in her workshop, staring at the mining laser she had been calibrating, and suddenly saw it differently, not as a tool for cutting rock, but as a weapon that could punch through armor plating. Her hands moved without conscious thought, pulling up technical specifications on her computer. She began making modifications to the laser's focusing array, increasing its power output and narrowing its beam. The changes came to her naturally, as if she had always known how to turn mining equipment into instruments of war. "What are you doing, Carla?" asked her assistant Pete Wilson as he watched her work. "Getting ready," she replied, not looking up from her modifications. "Those things are coming, and when they get here, we're going to be ready for them." The same transformation was happening across human space. On the cargo freighter New Frontier, Captain Steve Johnson gathered his crew around the ship's central table. Steve had spent 15 years hauling freight between colonies, building a reputation as a reliable civilian captain who stayed out of trouble. But as he looked at his crew, Steve found himself thinking like a military commander. His cargo ship could carry more than just supplies. The loading bay could hold fighters. The cargo cranes could mount weapons. The reinforced hull could ram smaller vessels. "Listen up," Steve told his crew. "We're not running freight anymore. We're going to war." His crew stared at him in surprise. These were civilian spacers, not soldiers. But as Steve began explaining his plans, something awakened in their eyes. They nodded and asked questions about weapon placement and armor modifications. Ideas flowed freely, each crew member contributing thoughts that seemed to come from nowhere. Within hours, they had designed a complete conversion plan that would turn their peaceful freighter into a warship. None of them had military training, but somehow they all knew exactly what needed to be done. Dr. Lisa Murphy watched the transformation happening around her with growing amazement and fear. As a psychologist stationed on Earth's primary space port, she had access to medical records and behavioral data from across human space. What she was seeing defied every theory of human psychology she had ever studied. "It's like they're remembering something they never learned," she recorded in her daily log. Combat tactics, weapon design, strategic thinking, these skills are appearing in civilians who have never seen military service. It's as if some kind of genetic memory is activating. The changes weren't limited to individuals. Entire human communities began operating with a coordination that shocked even experienced military observers. Civilian engineers worked through the night to retrofit ships for combat. Factory workers abandoned their regular production schedules to manufacture weapons and armor. Farmers organized themselves into supply networks that could support military operations. General Nick Bradley had been retired for 8 years, living quietly on a farm in Kansas and trying to forget 3 decades of military service. When the emergency broadcasts began, he felt the old, familiar weight settling on his shoulders. By the time he reached the nearest recruitment center, he found a line of civilians waiting to volunteer. But these weren't the confused, frightened people he had expected. They moved with purpose, asked intelligent questions about unit assignments and equipment requirements. A baker wanted to know about field rations. A school teacher inquired about communication protocols. A factory worker discussed the technical specifications of personal armor. "Where did you learn about military logistics?" Bradley asked the baker. The man looked puzzled. "I don't know. It just makes sense." Similar scenes played out across human space. Retired officers found themselves overwhelmed with volunteers who seemed to understand military concepts without training. Civilian shipyards began producing warships using designs that appeared overnight, created by engineers who claimed the blueprints just came to them. Commander Morrison watched the transformation from his office on Earth, fielding reports that grew more impossible with each passing hour. Civilian freighter captains were organizing themselves into battle fleets. Mining stations were becoming weapons platforms. Even the peaceful colonies were requesting military advisors and weapon shipments. "Sir," his aide reported, "we're getting communication requests from over 200 civilian ship captains. They want to know about fleet formations and combat tactics. Do any of them have military backgrounds?" "Less than 10%, sir. The rest are merchants, miners, and transport pilots." Morrison stared at the reports spread across his desk. Humanity was mobilizing for war faster than any military organization could have managed, and they were doing it without central command or government orders. It was as if the entire species had received the same message and responded as one. Dr. Murphy's research revealed the scope of the transformation. Brain scans showed unusual activity in regions associated with spatial reasoning and pattern recognition. Stress hormone levels were elevated, but not in the chaotic way associated with panic. Instead, humans showed the focused biochemical profile of persistence hunters tracking prey. "They're not becoming more aggressive," she noted in her reports. "They're becoming more focused. Every human I've tested shows the same pattern: enhanced situational awareness, improved coordination, and an instinctive understanding of combat principles." The transformation reached its peak when reports began arriving from the outer colonies. Kate Sullivan's voice crackled through the communication array from Haven's Rest, her tone calm but urgent. "Earth Command, this is Security Chief. Sullivan, we have confirmed harvester ships approaching our position. Estimated arrival in 18 hours. Chief Sullivan," Morrison replied, "evacuation ships are en route. You should have your people off planet within 12 hours. "Negative, sir. We're not evacuating. We're staying to fight." Morrison felt a chill run down his spine. "Chief, you have minimal defensive capabilities. Those ships will destroy you. Sir, you should see what these people have done. The colonists have turned farming equipment into weapons. The children are helping design defensive positions. Even the aliens are asking how they can help fight." "The aliens?" "Yes, sir. The Valderi and Nexan families here say they've never seen anything like this. They want to know how humans can coordinate so perfectly without any training." Morrison closed his eyes. The peaceful colonists of Haven's Rest, the ones the Galactic Council had praised as examples of humanity's evolution, were preparing to fight an enemy that had destroyed entire fleets. Reports flooded in from across human space. Mining platforms were being converted into battle stations. Merchant fleets were organizing into combat formations. Even human diplomats were requesting weapon permits and tactical training. The most disturbing report came from Ambassador Lisa Carter herself. The woman who had spent 3 years preaching humanity's peaceful evolution was now demanding access to military intelligence and strategic planning databases. "We need to know everything about harvester capabilities," she told Morrison during their emergency briefing. "Ship configurations, weapon systems, tactical preferences. Our people are ready to fight, but they need information." "Lisa, what happened to your belief in diplomatic solutions?" Her eyes were cold and focused in a way Morrison had never seen before. "Diplomacy is a tool for dealing with rational beings. These creatures aren't interested in negotiation. They want to consume us. So we're going to destroy them first." Morrison realized that the woman sitting across from him was no longer the peaceful ambassador who had addressed the Galactic Council. Something primal and dangerous had awakened in her, just as it had awakened in every human across known space. The galaxy was about to discover that humanity's 3 years of peaceful behavior had not been evolution. It had been suppression. And now that suppression was gone, replaced by something that made the Galactic Council's worst fears about human nature seem laughably optimistic. The hunters were awake, and they were ready for war. The battle for Haven's Rest began at dawn. Security Chief Kate Sullivan stood on the colony's command tower, watching as 6 massive harvester ships descended from orbit like falling mountains. Each vessel was larger than the entire settlement, their biomechanical hulls pulsing with sick light as weapon ports opened along their sides. "All units, this is Sullivan," she spoke into her communicator with calm precision. "Enemy contact confirmed. Execute Battle Plan Alpha." Below her, the transformed colonists moved with deadly efficiency. Paul Martin, the former peaceful administrator, coordinated defensive positions from the central bunker. Dr. Ryan Clark had converted his research station into a weapons platform, using modified scientific equipment to target the alien ships. Even the children helped, running supplies and information between fighting positions with the focused intensity of veteran soldiers. The first harvester beam struck the outer perimeter, vaporizing 3 buildings in a flash of green energy. But, instead of panicking, the colonists responded like a pack of wolves closing in on wounded prey. Carla Davis opened fire with her converted mining lasers, punching holes through the lead ship's armor. Captain Steve Johnson's converted freighter swooped down from high orbit, raking the harvester flanks with improvised weapons. "Colony Sullivan to Fleet Command," Kate reported as explosions lit up the sky around her. "We are engaged with 6 harvester vessels, requesting immediate support." "Sullivan, this is Admiral Bradley," came the reply from the approaching human fleet. "We show your defensive capabilities as minimal. You should evacuate immediately." "Negative, Command. We're not running. We're hunting." On the bridge of his flagship Endurance, Fleet Commander Alex Rivers watched the battle data with growing amazement. The small colony was not just surviving against impossible odds, they were winning. The converted civilian equipment was tearing through harvester defenses like they were made of paper. "Sir," his tactical officer reported, "the colonists are using combat patterns I've never seen before. They're coordinating without apparent communication, anticipating enemy movements perfectly." "How is that possible?" "Unknown, sir. But they're making the enemy ships look clumsy and slow." The harvester ships began to retreat, pulling back from the colony's surprisingly effective defenses. But Kate Sullivan's voice crackled over the communication array with orders that chilled Rivers to the bone. "All units, enemy is attempting. Withdrawal. Do not let them escape. Hunt them down and destroy every last one." The colonists pursued the retreating harvesters with merciless efficiency. Steve Johnson's freighter worked with 2 other converted civilian ships to surround one of the alien vessels. They attacked from 3 directions simultaneously, their movements coordinated without any visible communication. The harvester ship tried to fight back, but the humans seemed to anticipate every move, staying always just out of reach while their weapons carved through alien armor. They're not just fighting, Rivers realized. They're playing with their prey. The largest harvester ship turned to make a final stand, its massive weapons charging for a devastating attack on the colony. But Paul Martin was ready. The peaceful Sci administrator who had once worried about harvest schedules now commanded a defensive network that responded to his orders like extensions of his own body. All defensive platforms, focus fire on target 1, Paul commanded. Children, clear the impact zones. Medical teams, prepare for casualties. The colony's improvised weapons opened fire as one, creating a focused beam of energy that punched straight through the harvester ship's center mass. The alien vessel broke apart in a series of explosions that lit up the sky like a second sun. As the last harvester ship fell, Kate Sullivan stood among the wreckage of what had been a peaceful farming colony. Around her, humans who had never seen combat before calmly checked their weapons and prepared for the next fight. Colony Sullivan to Fleet Command, she reported. All enemy vessels destroyed. No human casualties. We are ready for the next target. The news of Haven's Rests. Victory spread through human space like wildfire. But it was only the beginning. Across dozens of star systems, similar battles were taking place as humanity's transformed nature revealed itself to a horrified galaxy. Captain Danny Wright had been wrong about one thing. The harvesters hadn't eaten his ship. They had tried to study it, to understand the strange little creatures who had built it. When the human rescue fleet arrived at the location where Lucky Strike had disappeared, they found something that defied belief. The massive harvester vessel was drifting, dead in space, its hull torn open from the inside. Rescue teams found Captain Wright alive in the ship's biomechanical interior, along with the twisted remains of dozens of harvester crew members. "How did you escape?" Commander Morrison asked when Wright was brought aboard the rescue ship. Wright's eyes were cold and focused, transformed like every other human in the galaxy. "I didn't escape. I fought my way out. Turns out these things aren't so tough when you get up close." "You killed dozens of them." "With what?" Wright held up a piece of twisted metal. "Improvised weapons, ship parts, my bare hands when I had to. They tried to study me like I was some kind of lab animal. Big mistake." Morrison stared at the man who had once been a peaceful merchant captain. Wright showed no signs of trauma or stress, just the same deadly calm that Morrison was seeing in humans everywhere. The transformation reached its peak during the final battle at the edge of human space. The Harvester Prime's main fleet, over 300 massive ships, moved to crush what they saw as a minor resistance. They had consumed dozens of galaxies and faced thousands of species. None had ever posed a real threat to their overwhelming technological superiority. They were not prepared for what humanity had become. The human fleet that met them was a patchwork of converted civilian ships, hastily armed freighters, and improvised weapons platforms. By all logic, they should have been destroyed in minutes. Instead, they moved through the harvester formation like sharks through a school of fish. Every human ship seemed to know exactly where to be and when to be there. They attacked in perfect coordination without any visible command structure, striking at weak points and disappearing before the enemy could respond. The massive harvester vessels, designed to overwhelm opponents with sheer size and firepower, found themselves outmaneuvered at every turn. Fleet Commander Rivers watched from his bridge as a converted mining ship destroyed a harvester vessel, 10 times its size, by somehow knowing exactly where to place its weapons for maximum effect. A group of freighter captains surrounded and systematically dismantled another alien ship, their movements so perfectly coordinated they seemed to share a single mind. "Sir," his communications officer reported, "we're receiving surrender signals from the surviving harvester ships." "Surrender? After 3 hours of fighting?" "Yes, sir. The enemy fleet is requesting permission to withdraw from this galaxy." Rivers looked at his tactical display. Of the 300 harvester ships that had entered the battle, fewer than 50 remained functional. The human fleet had suffered minimal losses while completely destroying an enemy that had consumed entire galaxies. But the most shocking thing was the human response to the surrender request. Instead of accepting it, they continued their attack with cold efficiency, hunting down every remaining harvester ship until none survived. When the battle ended, Fleet Commander Rivers found himself commanding a fleet of humans who showed no celebration. No relief, just calm satisfaction at a job well done. They had not just defeated an existential threat to the galaxy. They had eliminated it completely. The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened 3 days later. Representatives from dozens of species sat in stunned silence as commander. Morrison presented the battle reports. Humanity had not just survived the Harvester invasion. They had crushed it so thoroughly that no trace of the alien fleet remained. "How is this possible?" Chairman Zethkar asked, his ethereal form flickering with confusion. 3 months ago, your species was committed to peaceful coexistence. Now you have demonstrated military capabilities that exceed our understanding. Morrison looked around the chamber at the faces of beings who had spent years trying to domesticate humanity, to turn them into something safe and predictable. "Honored Chairman, we never stopped being what we are. We simply chose not to show it. But when something threatens our families, our children, our future, that choice ends." "And what are you?" War Master Throck asked quietly. Morrison's smile was cold and sharp. "We are what evolution created when it needed something that could hunt anything, anywhere, anytime. We are the thing that other predators have nightmares about. And now the galaxy knows it too. The vote to establish humanity as the official protectors of galactic space was unanimous. Not because the other species trusted humans, but because they finally understood what humanity really was beneath their peaceful facade. The age of galactic peace was over. The age of human guardianship had begun.